Right, let's get started. So hi everybody, thank you for joining us. Thank you for still trickling into the attendee list. It's brilliant to have you all here today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Amelia. I'm one of the community coordinators on Beyond. And for those of you that don't even know Beyond, Beyond is a program of free and funded support. It's for organisations like yours, kind of small non-profits, charities, small, big, medium-sized, to help you boost your skills in things like digital and design and adapt your services in times of uncertainty or crisis. So it's kind of the perfect antidote to right now. We also do some subsector specific work in areas like financial well-being, early years, mental health and sexual and domestic violence, where we can give you some more tailored support. The session today is the third one in our 5-part training series. So we're absolutely halfway through now. And this one is about turning data and insights into actionable ideas. So all the things that you've learned, if you've joined us in previous sessions, all the things that you've learned from your users and all the ideas and opportunities you've come up with, how do you now turn those into actual action? So Teo, this is our second dose of Teo on this training program. Teo is going to be our trainer today. She's the Innovation Director at Shift. For those of you that joined us in the very first session, she introduced us to the trainings, and I'm really excited to have her back with us today. Just a few kind of like housekeeping reminders. So we can't see you sadly, but we can definitely see the chat, and I'm going to be hanging out there talking to you all, making sure everyone's okay. We love to hear from you, so if you want to post and let us all know how you're doing and kind of chat amongst yourselves about things that we've learned or things we're talking about, you can post in there, but remember to use all panelists and attendees so that everybody else can see what you're talking about as well. And there's also a Q&A function, so you can pop questions in there, and if we get there at the end, I hope that we will, I'll fill some of those to Teo and see how many we can throw at her in the short time that we have left at the end. And so then I just want to give you a quick note about accessibility. So at Beyond, we are trying to make sure everyone can participate in our sessions and get a lot of value from them. We're still learning on this, but we've made some commitments, which you can see on the slide that I've shared here. But I think really please let us know if there's anything we can do to make the sessions more accessible or improve the experience for you, either today just by posting in the chat and letting me know, or by emailing us at hello@joinbeyond.org, and myself or Emily will answer you. You can switch on live captions today in Zoom, so you should be able to see that on your screen, and they work quite well. And we will also record the session and make it available on the Beyond blog, along with the slides and any templates that Teo talks you through today. So you'll be able to look back at them, and you can use the YouTube captions on those, so they're really easy. I think that's everything. Hi everybody, and let me hand over to Teo to give you loads more information.
Thank you, Amelia. Really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I just want to say massive thanks for joining today's Beyond training on how to turn data and insights into actionable ideas for adapting to crisis. It's really exciting to see you all trickling in and to see some of you back again. In today's session, we're going to be focusing on sharing an approach to breaking down big, unruly questions into manageable, more specific chunks, so that you can use those as sort of jumping off points for great ideas. As Amelia said, this is a Zoom webinar, so I can't see or hear you, but please do tell us who you are in the chat bar. You can also use that all the way throughout the session to let me know what is and isn't resonating. And it's a bit of a packed session today, and it will run for about 50 minutes, give or take. But I'm aiming to have time left at the end so that we can field some questions for you. So you can also ask some questions directly then. So as Amelia also said, this will be available for recording later today, in case you want to watch it back or in case you want to share it. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Teo Madupin. Here is a visual summary of me on a page. My audio description is a Black woman with short black brown hair. I've spent the last 12 years or so as a human-centered design strategist, and I've been basically working with everyone from Colgate and Samsung and Alphabet X to Alphabet, to Wellcome Trust, Homestart, and NSPCC. And as Amelia mentioned, I'm currently Innovation Director at the award-winning charity Shift, and we're one of the founding organizations behind Beyond. Here's, in case you're interested, also a glimpse of some of the other projects and programs we're currently working on. So I'm really excited to be taking you through this third and final design thinking training today, because turning data and insights into actionable ideas is actually one of the most critical parts of the design thinking journey, and is actually one of my favorites. It's all about making sense of what has been shared and what has been heard and what you know, and using that to break complex, messy, wicked questions into challenges that are much more specific, much more approachable, and much more inspiring. So questions such as, how can I create warm relationships remotely? Or how can I provide remote support to people without access to digital or data? Or how can I better support staff in around their well-being and prevent burnout during the pandemic? It's also good for even messier, more unruly questions like, how can we balance sustainability with impact? Or how can we make civil society more equitable? Or how can we future-proof our organization in a COVID and post-COVID world? So this ability to make sense of massive amounts of data, information, and viewpoints, and make decisions based on it is one of the consistently most tricky in the design thinking mindsets. And it's one that can often act, I've heard, as a barrier to progress in organizations. So now I want to share that there are so many different ways to break down information into manageable chunks and make decisions, and make challenges more manageable. That includes, starting with hunches and hypotheses that you already have. That's a great place to start. It might include making decisions based on experience and expertise. However, I'm going to share with you one process that is, I think of it as like a useful hack, basically, for nurturing this mindset in your organization and helping your teams to get unstuck. So it's something you can use if you don't have a strong hunch or hypothesis, if you're struggling to reach agreements with your teams, or if you even want to democratize some of the decision making that you're doing in your organization by involving other stakeholders from inside and outside to help set directions. And it's an approach, it's just one of those approaches that you can reach for in those moments. So this is a process that's best used when you're really just trying to get unstuck. And it comprises of, really asks you to do three things. The first thing is make what you know visible. The second is define a clear question or a clearer question. And then the third is to use that clearer question as a springboard to new ideas. And I'll take you through each of these one by one over today's session. And in the first section, we'll be basically talking about the power of making things visible. In organizations, I think we really rely often on discussions and conversations, or we love a report or a chart or a graph, and we use these for our decision making. And that is great, but often that can be undemocratic, exclusive, and can actually be a death trap in moving forward in the design thinking process. In the second section, this is actually where we're going to spend the majority of our time, we'll be sharing a 5-step process for processing that information that you have, by basically turning it into that clearer question that can act as a springboard. And then in the third section, we'll hopefully have a bit of fun, if the tech works out, and test some new clearer questions or springboards and play a few ideation games to show how this process can help you to widen back out and come up with new creative ideas that can then be tested, prioritized, and prototyped. All right, so let's go. So in this first section, it's all about making things visible. For many of us, I think most of us, when we are faced with a big and seemingly insurmountable challenge in our organization, oftentimes, and we might not realize it, but we are sitting on mountains of important information that can be useful. So that could be things that we've read, that could be things that we've heard, that could be things that we've learned through social media listening or networks. It could be things that we've even got through specific research that we've commissioned or undertaken ourselves, maybe using some of the methodologies that Fan shared last week. And this information is often held between us in our minds, in discussions and reports, and as I mentioned, in write-ups. But That often is a muddy realm where even if you're really, really good at pattern matching between those things, it can sometimes be hard to align on what we know and also hard to prioritize, especially when we're holding and sharing and processing information in that way. So one great way to sort through the data for yourselves and especially for others is to get it out in the open. So out of your mind, out of the books, out of the reports, and into a format where you and others can see it more easily and at the same time. And this is one of the reasons why design has almost become synonymous with the post-it note on the wall. Like this image is one that you've probably seen before. It's almost to the point of parody. And it's not just because we like pretty things and colorful pieces of paper. It's also because it is a way to make information something that's more digestible, something that's more democratic, something that's movable, and something that is shared. So by pulling out the most important quotes of your like 600-page book onto short, sharp post-it notes, more people are able to take it in. By making everyone write their thoughts on post-it notes, it means that everyone's information becomes of equal weight, value, and importance. It's not dictated by the fact that some people are more likely to speak, and also some people are more likely to be listened to. So you can't be shy, you can't be charming, you can't be eloquent on a post-it note. And by separating what is known into single separate post-it notes, you can move and match and edit and use that to find new patterns and information and experiment with new ways of seeing a challenge, an issue, or an idea. And then finally, by putting it up in the wall, virtually or otherwise, together, you're for the first time creating something that is truly collaborative and shared. So I don't want to overdo it, but that is all the power of the lowly post-it note. So this is something we can all do with your teams, by yourself or with your teams, even when you're remotely. And there are a load of free and paid digital whiteboards out there that you can experiment with and maybe already have. That includes Jamboard, which is free with a Google account. It includes Miro, which you probably have heard quite a lot recently, and also Mural. Currently, it's also worth saying that, like their offline cousins, these platforms aren't yet doing enough to make their products accessible for everyone. So hopefully there are more accessible options, but these hopefully will be a useful tool for you. All right, so before I move on, some quick tips to make information visible in this way. So the first one, think Sharpie. There's also a reason that designers burn through Sharpies. It encourages your writing to be big and legible and limits the amount of information that you can squeeze onto a single post-it note. This lends itself to the second tip, which is commit to 1 point per post-it note. So if you try to fit loads of things onto one post-it note, it almost defeats the point if you're writing a mini thesis. So try and keep different thoughts and ideas separate, even if they're very connected. That's also a really handy way to wade through messy questions and improve the clarity of communication between teams. And it also means that you can agree with one part of a sentence or one part of an argument, but not the other. And then the last one is a small one, but some people do like to create a code or a color code or a label. So that's a way that you can trace your sources information back to the source. For example, you might color code to differentiate quotes from books, from quotes from people you might have heard from, or you might use colors and letters to differentiate information from users and information from practitioners. So whatever you find useful for you. And so that's all in that section. So just a call to you all to process information by making it visible. And in the next section, we'll share you a process for doing this. So before we do that, just a few quick questions for you. And I'd actually love to see your answers in the chat. So the first question: how are you currently processing information in your organization? So how do you currently process information in your organization? So sharing slides, talking about it, Word, Excel, thinking on Mural, weekly team meetings, amazing. So a lot of discussions, team conversations, talking, emailing, conversations. And as I say, like all of that is rich and important information you're collecting all of the time. Really interesting to see how you can pull some of that, those streams of thoughts and those pieces of information into somewhere you can look at it all at the same time all together. The second question is, how are you collaborating remotely? So how are you collaborating remotely? So we've got a lot of Zooms, Google Docs, Zooms, Teams, meetings. So good cultures already of being together, collaborating in moments. So all WhatsApp, that's a cool one, Slack, Google Meet. So all the nice moments where you can be thinking about the processes that you're putting in place in your meeting times. Are you sitting on Zoom and having conversations where the words are held between you and in your heads, or are you finding ways to make sure that your conversations are forming something that you can then look back on together in visual, accessible ways? The last question is, are you, or how often are you making your knowledge visible? Are you, or how often are you making your knowledge visible? As much as I have an opportunity to, that's great. Often, sometimes by email, depends, some extent. So a really mixed bag. There's no need for shame face. This is absolutely just one approach to making sure that teams can collaborate well together. So thanks for sharing that, everyone. Do keep them coming, even though I'll probably have my eyes off the chat for the next little while. In this next section, we'll be sharing a process that provides an approach to making sense of the tons of information and creating a clearer challenge or brief. But before we do that, because I know I am going at speed and there's a lot packed in, I'm just going to give us a little 60-second brain break. Okay, that's really great. So welcome back, everyone. So in the last section, we talked about making information visible and how that can help to make information accessible, digestible, shared, and more democratic. Now we're going to share a process by which you can actually move from the messy to the clear. So this process requires some time between 2 hours and 2 days, depending on how much information you're sifting through. So it's actually not one that we should always be reaching for, especially at moments when you're super resource strapped, but it is a process that can ultimately save time and resource and helps teams to make clear steps forward. And I want to stress again that this is just one approach to breaking down complex challenges, and one I'd very much recommend if you do not yet have a strong hunch, are struggling to reach an agreement with your team, or want to democratize some decisions involving more stakeholders from inside and outside of your organization. It's great for questions when you have a clear idea of your goals and objectives already, but you don't have clarity on the answers or the potential directions or how to get there. And as I say, I would avoid this for things you already have a strong hunch about or a hypothesis, because this is also a great place to start. And that's something we'll be covering in next week's training. And it's important to know that this process is more about finding design inspiration using data than looking for absolute proof. This is a process that gets you to a strong hunch, as like humans, the design process cannot predict the future. It's using what we know to make decisions and then testing those decisions early and often so that we know what works by trying things, not searching for theoretical proof. And the process itself has 5 steps. The first is questions. That's making sure you know what the question is that you're trying to answer. As mentioned, this is really good for questions where there aren't the options and the answers aren't immediately obvious. The next is post-it notes. So that's pulling information that's relevant to the question onto post-it notes in a structured way. Themes, that's about finding commonalities and threads and stories within your post-it notes to paint a picture of behaviors, motivations, and barriers. Um, Insights, that's asking yourself, so what does all that mean, and creating clear insights that can offer you a new understanding or explanation of the question or the topic. And then finally, opportunities, which is taking a bit of a leap of faith and proposing a challenge or a set series of challenges that are more clear, manageable, and specific. And it is a process that will feel a little bit like this, and that is totally normal. You're working through to an answer that does not yet exist, so that is supernatural. And you'll often feel unclear and unsure. That's something that I still feel, and I've been doing this for 12 years. But this is worth it, as it can help to build clarity, consensus, and ultimately unlock really creative ideas. So at Shift, it's helped us to unlock creative ideas such as this fast food company that creates healthier everyday takeaway options for families who live on a low income. This video game that supports young people awaiting treatment for generalized anxiety disorders. And this limited run care pack that offers support and recognition to people stepping up to support parents during the pandemic. And I'll take you through each of the 5 phases of the process, step by step, with an example to illustrate how each step works. So first, let's get a question. For the purpose of this training, let's use this one. How might we better understand how to create meaningful connections with service users when working in a remote setting? So something that I'm sure many of you are grappling with at the moment. And so for this question, the next thing I'm going to do is get everything that my team and I already know onto post-it notes, or things that we've heard onto post-it notes. To structure this, I'm going to think about 3 things. What people have actually said, that's perhaps through interviews or discussions or even casual conversations, workshops, or social media. What I've seen or observed, either in my own day-to-day work or maybe by shadowing practitioners or watching sessions, etc. And then finally, what I've concluded or inferred. So that's things I haven't necessarily actually seen or actually heard, but things that I feel to be true. For example, I might have heard that it feels impossible to make a connection in 60 minutes over Zoom. I may have seen that it took 45 minutes of the 60-minute session for the service user even to disclose their core concern. And then I might also have concluded that it takes more than 60 minutes to build trust between a service user and their counsellor. And you can pull these from memory, from notes taken from interviews, from recordings, from transcripts, even from grey literature, whatever you have to hand. Again, choosing your colour code or your approach to making sure you can trace it back to the source. It's also worth saying that you can use any structure you want to get the post-it notes down. You could pull out drivers and barriers, you could do wants and needs, or like preferences and priorities, or actions, behaviors, whatever feels useful for you and your original question. This is just really one simple structure that is pretty universal and easy to use. So once I've got all of my thoughts down and the things that we've pulled out onto a virtual and physical whiteboard, it might look a little bit like this. And now it's time to make sense of what we've found, and that's the next step. So now I'm interested in looking for common threads or themes in the post-it notes. So a cheat is to look for behaviors, motivations, and challenges. So you're looking for themes that give you a clue about what might be going on. So what might be going right and what might not be going so right. On your physical or virtual whiteboard, you can move post-its about and bring post-its together that sort of feel like they're common and belong together. And I want to stress that this is not a science. This is not a scientific practice. As we're not looking for proof or absolute evidence with this, we're looking for inspiration and we're looking for insight. So it's good to be open-minded as you experiment with what different combinations of post-its might tell you about the question at hand. So once you have your group of post-it notes that feel like they belong together because they show your behavior or motivation or challenge, you might want to, because they feel also interesting and relevant, you would want to bring them together and label them in something that summarizes them as a theme. So for example, in this load of post-it notes you can see on the screen, you might notice a connection between post-its that say, service users and counsellors have other people in the house, and service users keep their videos off during the calls, or counsellors have their videos on during the calls, or your conclusion that there's a lack of privacy on Zoom calls. And you might bring those all together and label them managing visibility and privacy or something like that. Or you might have noticed a common motivation in these 4 post-it notes. Service users saying that they don't always know what to bring up in sessions, that they don't want to waste counsellors' time, that counsellors saying they feel pressure to make sessions more productive, and your conclusion that pressure makes it harder to concentrate on building meaningful connections. And you might bring these all together. Sorry, I've pressed something completely wrong. Apologies, let me try that again. And you might bring these all together and label them desire or pressure to be productive. Or finally, you might notice that there are similar barriers and challenges expressed in these post-it notes. So it took 40 minutes to disclose a key concern, or service users wanting to make the use of their limited time and not wanting to bring up things that might take more than 60 minutes to unpack, and trust taking more than 60 minutes than we have. And you might bring those together in a group and label them no time for trust or something like that. And depending on the number of post-it notes you have, you could have anywhere between like 5 and 20 clusters, maybe even more. And some clusters will have fewer post-its and some will have more. And as you've seen, this is all about finding interesting themes that give you an added layer of understanding about what's going on. So unlike other approaches, this is not scientific and there's no binary right or wrong answer. So do really keep that in mind. So next, we need to ask, so what? Why are these themes useful? What can they tell us about the potential answers or hunches that we should pursue? And it's now time to really use those themes to define a clear insight. And an insight is something that draws across multiple post-its of different kinds and also multiple themes to give you a clear articulation of a desired, preferred, optimal, required behavior, or needs or motivations, alongside the challenges that stand in their way and the opportunities that enable them. They are not just about describing what is, so it's not like it's hard to build meaningful connections online, because that's just a statement of fact or a truism. It's about describing why it is and or what could be. And it's about providing a new lens on an old issue or a new route into potential solutions. And there are 3 easy ways to make a useful insight statement, which will provide you and others with clarity of what's going on. So there are insight statements that explain issues and messes. So that's things that are just not working. Tensions. So those are things that are competing realities or existing trade-offs. And insights that highlight what's possible or things that could be. So that's all things that are like untapped opportunities. And here are 3 simple insight recipes, if you will, that you can use. The first one helps you to explain issues by sharing the issue, tension, and problem or blocker and the reason it is happening. And that second bit is really important. And here's an example of this. The second one helps you with explaining tensions by looking at needs, wants, desired behaviors and challenges, and the challenges then, that stand in the way of achieving that. So really the needs, wants and behaviors, and then the challenges to achieving this. And here's an example of that. And the last one helps you to find untapped potential. So it again looks at the needs of the wants and the desired behaviors, but this time it asks like what makes that newly possible. So that's an example of this. So at this stage of the process, you'll likely have a load of insights. So in times like this, I mean, during a pandemic when we're all strapped for time and resource constraints, it's really useful to prioritize insights that focus on things that represent the biggest opportunity for progress if they were addressed, and that represents something that you and your team have sufficient control and influence over. However, of course, if you have more resource available, don't shy away from insights that speak to larger, more systemic issues that require more collaboration across teams and across organizations. For this process, however, because just to show you how it works, let's just decide to take forward this insight. So service users wanted to make the most out of councillor time, but 60 minutes not really feeling enough to feel ready to share. The fifth and final step now then is to turn this into our clear and specific challenge. And this will act as a useful springboard for coming up for new, exciting, relevant idea. It bounds us, but also opens us up and opens up our process of idea generation and selection. But it also does require a bit of a leap of faith. So to recap the journey so far, we had an original question that was big and kind of unwieldy. We got all we knew about that question down on post-it notes, focusing on what had been said, seen, and inferred. We sorted those post-it notes in to form themes, which reflected the behaviors, motivations, and challenges at play. Then we looked at those themes and pulled what we had found into clear insight statements that highlighted the issues, tensions, and potentials we had found, and then prioritized those insights that we felt were most important to solve and were within our sphere of influence. And now here we are at the final stage, ready to take a bit of a leap of faith to define a more specific, clear challenge, or like a smaller slice of that original big question. And a good approach to take here is to turn insights into a how might we statement. And these are a secret weapon in design thinking, and one you probably already or might have already come across before. So how might we's are a useful way to frame a challenge, turning problems and opportunities into a question, basically, that you can ask yourself and ask your teams, like a smaller, more manageable brief, essentially. So a how might we is useful as it suggests that there is a solution possible, but it doesn't yet suggest a specific answer and leaves you open to possibilities. And that's a great way to unlock new thinking and more creative ideas. So to do this, you just fill in the blanks. What is it that you want to do? Is it you want to redesign a service or create a new one, or do you want to change something about an existing service? Which group of people do you want to benefit from this? So is this your staff? Is this the counsellors? Is this your service users? And then what barriers are you going to tackle, or what opportunities are you going to leverage? So what do you want to do? What group of people do you want to benefit from it? And what barriers or opportunities are you going to tackle or leverage? So for our example, thinking about our insight, which was that service users want to make the most of their time, but 60 minutes does not feel enough time to feel ready to share, we could use this template to create the following how might we. So how might we, I should stop pressing random things, I'm so sorry. How might we take the pressure off the counselling moment for both counsellors and service users, by giving them easy ways to build relationships between visits? Or we might say, how might we redesign the counselling moment for service users with complex needs to help them make the most of their 60-minute sessions? Or we might say, how might we make counselling sessions more productive for new service users by helping them to turn up to their sessions confident and prepared? And so you'll notice that each of these takes a little leap of faith. And we do this to find the space that feels fruitful. So you look at the insight and you're interpreting how might you come up with solutions. So you're asking yourself, based on what you know, what element of the insight might you focus on? Is it alleviating the barrier, or are you working within the constraint, or are you removing the constraint, or are you reframing the issue completely? And a good how might we shouldn't be too broad, because we don't want to end up at the original question. And they shouldn't be too narrow, because they shouldn't actually lead to just one single answer, because that defeats the purpose. And they should also help you come up with new potential ideas. And if it can't, it likely isn't a useful springboard. And How Might We doesn't have to be quote unquote perfect. It just has to offer you and your team personally potential and a springboard for ideas. If it feels like it's unlocking new thinking and possibilities for you, then that's literally all that counts. And in this process, you're not going to be looking for necessarily one perfect how might we. You might have loads, and you can do this by brainstorming many different how might we statements, ideally with other people, and test which ones feel most exciting and spark most creativity. And an easy way to test this is to see how many ideas you can come up with in like 2 or 3 minutes. And if it's less than 3, it might not be fruitful. So that's the process. Question, post-its, themes, insights, and finally an opportunity, or how might we. And I'm going to pause there for a moment to give you all a 2-minute brain break. And when we come back, we'll do a quick reflection and then cover the last section about finding new ideas. Welcome back. So far, we've been through the reasons it's useful to make your insights visible, and share the 5-step process for breaking down unwieldy challenges into manageable chunks. And I wanted to give you a chance to do a little reflection on what you've heard before the quick break. But before I do so, some pro tips. Only use this 5-step process when it's useful. As I've said, if you've already got good ideas and strong hunches based on what you know, just skip this step. You'll learn how to lead through hypotheses and hunches in the training session next week. Involve others. This process is best completed with others, as it's a great way to build buy-in and alignment across teams. But it's also be mindful of who you do and do not involve, as decision-making processes like this can really reinforce inclusion and exclusion. So it's always a good idea, if you can, to involve and hand over the power to people who will be most influenced by the process, decisions, and ultimately the outcomes. Prioritize inspiration. So this, again, as I say, is not a process designed for proof. There are other really good research methodologies for that. This is about creative inspiration and direction. So only use this if you need help taking forward towards a solid hunch, not to find the evidence. Keep the insight close. So it's always a good idea to keep the insight statements that you found and your how might we's quite connected, so that you remember the original challenge and opportunity that you're trying to solve for. The insight should always remain true and important no matter what happens, even if the how might we's and the subsequent ideas change. And if it isn't working, again, just a repeat on the first point, just skip it. I cannot stress this enough. Only do this or continue with the process if it is helping your decision making and helping you and your teams to move forward. If it isn't, just then leave it alone. And as I say, next week's training will share how you can feel more personally and collectively confident to start with your existing hunches. So, reflection time. This time, grab a notebook and for each question, write down at least 3 bullet points. You can do this as a solo exercise in your own notebook or share in the chat. The first question is, how did the process feel for you? How did the process feel for you? Next, what did you recognize from your own work? What did you recognize from your own work? What would and wouldn't you use this process for? What would and wouldn't you use this process for? What parts of this process are you most and least comfortable with? What parts of this process are you most and least comfortable with? And the final question, when could you experiment with this approach? When could you experiment with this approach? Amazing. So I hope you enjoyed that small reflection. Now it's time to move into the third and final section of the training, and that's finding new ideas. So in this section, we'll be having some fun by seeing how a good how might we statement can act as a springboard to new ideas. So now we have our how might we, which is this. Let's just move it into a full sentence of its own, somewhere clean. So that is, how might we take the pressure off the counselling moment for both counsellors and service users by finding new ways to build relationships before, during, and after visits? So you can now use this to come up with new ideas, and there are many ways to do that. Some pro tips when you are coming up with ideas. This is about quantity and speed. It is about providing yourself with as many routes and ideas as possible. Because of this, it's also a good idea to ignore quality for now. You can whittle down to useful, meaningful, and feasible ideas later. And to do that, you'll likely need to suspend reality. So think yes and, not but at this stage. This is about exploring all the possibilities, not about being right. And it's about pushing past that urge to shut things down. And if you do that at this stage, it can really help you to uncover additional creativity and potentially impactful ideas. And this might require you to get warmed up with some icebreakers and creative games, of which there are plenty. So when you are coming up with ideas, there are loads of techniques that you can use to help unlock creativity, from speed drawing and sketches. For example, activities like Crazy Eights, where you fold the paper into 8 boxes and then you draw one idea per box, giving yourself 30 seconds or a minute per square. Storyboards or user journeys where you can quickly reimagine an experience in story form. How Now Wow, where you're thinking about ideas on different levels of ease and different levels of originality. The Free Horizons framework, which encourages you to just think in the now, near, and future term. Serious play, where you can do role playing and play with Lego and use Play-Doh and crafts and find other ways to creatively imagine new possibilities together, and a plethora of other creative games. The idea being to generate a whole ton of ideas diverging out again in that double diamond. To sort through your ideas, then you can use a criteria of your choosing. Grids like this are always a great way to sort through ideas. So for example, you could sort by effort versus impact, or you could sort via impact versus feasibility, or value versus urgency. All great ways to sort through and prioritize large volumes of ideas. You obviously also don't need to limit yourself to 2 criteria. You can use your own organizational priorities to decide what to move forward with and what to discount. Again, it's useful here not to decide through conversation. Agreeing criteria up front is really useful, as it helps to turn decision making into a process. And that's a great way to move things forward. I also personally love to include criteria around passion and interest amongst the team, as inner drive and excitement is a vital ingredient in the change process. So you can take those ideas forward as strong hunches and prototypes, and that will be the focus of next week's training. So that's really almost at the end. That's just a call to use those platforms to come up with loads of ideas, and then using a criteria to whittle them down in a process-driven way. So now, as we wind down the training, and we've got a few minutes left, I just wanted to see if you wanted to try out some of these creative games. To do this, I've ambitiously created a Miro board where you should all have access to that. And Miro is really simple to use. We'll only be using this small post-it function, which you can get to by clicking this button. And you can also copy and paste post-it notes, so you could press the letter N to get an additional post-it note. Now, I want to say up front, if you cannot get in, if you have an incompatible device, or you don't yet know how to use Miro, or you are hampered by Miro's lack of accessibility, do not worry. You have other options. You can we're going to provide a link to a spreadsheet where you could also participate in the game by adding your ideas into cells, and then one of the Beyond hosts will help us to copy and paste that over. Or you could write this in your own notebook and post-its, or any post-its that you have to hand. So we'll share those links with you now. So we're going to do a rapid round of 10 ideation games. Again, if you want to join by Miro, go to the link bit.ly/beyondfun. And if you want to join by spreadsheet, you can go to bit.ly/beyond-idea-party. The links are now in chat. And we're just going to use these creative games to show you how you can use those How Might We's created as a jumping off point for idea generation. Each game, you're going to get 60 seconds, and this is about volume, not about quality. And throughout, remember that this is about coming up with wild ideas, not editing based on feasibility. So do keep an open mind. Okay, ambitious. So let's start off with an easy one. So thinking about the How Might We, which you'll see on the Miro board and on the screen in a moment, please write down as many ideas as you can in 60 seconds. Your time starts now. If you're struggling with if you're struggling with the Miro, do use your own notebook or use the spreadsheet. Next question. What if we lived in a time before Zoom? What if we lived in a time before Zoom? And if you are struggling with the Miro board, do feel free to do it in your own notebook or your own post-it notes or in the spreadsheet. What if we were 100 years in the future? What if we were 100 years in the future? If you missed the past questions, don't worry, you can start where we are. There are some great questions to come. Next one, what if there was nothing to fear? What would you do if there were nothing to fear? What would a 3-year-old do? What would a 3-year-old do? What would your marketing department do? What would a marketing department do? What if you could only take things away? What if you could only take things away? And I think this is the last question. What if you got to work with your closest competitor? What if you got to work with your closest competitor? All right. So there's loads of post-its there. So I'm going to jump forward past some of these additional questions and give you all like a really, really quick brain pause. It's so good to see the Miro filling up. Thank you all for joining me on that ambitious adventure. I just wanted to give you a flavor of using some of the techniques that we were discussing in this session. So as a recap, in this work, we have reviewed the power of visualizing what you know. We've walked through that 3-step process for breaking messy questions into clear challenges, or how might we's, and we've looked at ways to use how might we's as a jumping off point for creative ideas. So that was been a massive packed session, and we've got about 3 minutes left. So let's try and hand over to 1 or 2 questions with Amelia.
Hey Teo, wow. Also, thank you so much everyone for getting stuck on that Miro. It's really exciting. We were quite worried it would just be us hanging out in there. So I'm delighted to have you all. We've got 3 or 4 questions, Teo. Michael asked ages ago when we were thinking about putting things onto post-it notes and then theming them, if there's a good guide for how many themes to break a discussion into.
That's a great question. And if you mean how many themes might you end up with, I'd say like there's no real right or wrong answer there. I've had sessions where I've had as little as 3 themes, and ones where I think Amelia has been part of sessions with me with, you know, upwards of 50 themes. And I think the important thing there is to figure out how you're going to prioritize what to take forward. And a good way to do that is pre-agree your criteria and have a really strong original question that you're asking, because that enables you and the team to decide which of your 100 are relevant to you and which ones are just nice to know.
A really, really practical question. What was the software by Google that you mentioned earlier on?
So that was Jamboard. So jam, like jam in a jar, and then board. And you can find that in the Google suite. And you just need access by a Google email address.
Great. Amber, I've just seen it asking if it's recording a reference. Yeah, everything's going to be available on the blog for you, and we'll include the slides and also some of the templates, so you'll be able to find that. Right, let's squeeze in one last question. So Gareth asked how you might structure an online session for staff to get the most out of it. So thinking about things, I guess, like the pauses that you've given in for us today. Yeah. How would you structure that to work online?
Yeah. I think a great thing to do is make sure that you always check in with people when they join a session, so that you know where they are. Do think about how overwhelming it is, so encourage people to do what they need to get in the right head zone. That might be closing tabs, it might be being in a different room, etc. And then really use a combination of different styles of engagement. So some people like time to think by themselves quietly first, and then some people like to jump right into discussion. By using a blend of those different techniques, you make sure that everyone in your organization has a chance to really contribute to activities like this. And if better still, you build the conversation around a visual approach like this, I think is a really great way to make progress.
Sadaf's asked a really interesting question, and I know we're at time, but I'm just going to try and squeeze it in. So Sadaf asked about how this process could be applied to like existing services or previously designed services. So I guess thinking about adaptations, and it just feels really relevant for a lot of the people on the call. So I'm going to sneak it in.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And this is good for design and designing of new and existing services, if you are really clear on the question that you are aiming to answer. There are obviously other service design methodologies that enable you to really look at your entire service journey of an existing service or product and identify areas which could be improved. This is good if you're looking for new ideas within your services, for example, for a specific moment, or even the service at large. So that is a really short and brief way to answer that, but it can blend well with other service design disciplines and help you come up with new ideas for existing services.
Thank you, Teo. Right, we are definitely at time. So a huge thank you, Teo, and a little round of applause, because you can't see anyone else, from me, for getting through so much amazing content and taking us on such an ambitious journey with the Miro board. I've posted the feedback link in the chat. I would really appreciate it if those of you that have attended today could let us know what we're doing well, what we can do better, how we can support you on the Beyond journey and over the next few sessions to make this an even better training experience for you. This is a 5-part series, And the next week is with Louise Cooper, who is an innovation lead at Shift. So Teo and myself work with her quite often. And Louise really likes getting her hands dirty and putting things out into the world. So we heard a lot from all of you about how excited you were about the idea of putting things out into the world early and testing them out. And that's what Louise is going to talk to us about next week, how to do that quickly, how to prototype things, how to, without being too scared or risk too much of your reputation, get things out there to try them out and see if they work. So please do join us next Tuesday at 12 p.m. I also just wanted to plug one of the other courses on Beyond, which has just recently been announced and we're really excited about, which is about cybersecurity. So it's about practical ways to secure your organization against cyber threats and plan for a cyber attack. It's completely free, like all of the work on Beyond. And it's a two-part course. So the first part is like self-learning, and it's really interesting kind of practical process to go through. And the second part is a workshop that you need to have done the self-led learning for to join. But it's really fun because you're going to become like in charge of a fictional charity who are having a really bad day, and as a team work out how to support them through that attack. So we'd love you to sign up. You can find out more information about that course and all of the other things that we offer at joinbeyond.org. I think that's everything from us today. Just a huge thank you from Teo and myself and all the Beyond team for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks everyone. Bye.